I'm Gary Jacobs with Long Island Backstory. We're here today with Dr. Carlos Rivera, a pediatrician from Patchogue. We've told this story many times. It's been on Long Island News Radio. It's been all over social media. It's been on YouTube. It's been on FIT TV. But the more we roll the story, the more people want to hear more about the story. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to go right through the end and try to get a little bit more into depth into this horrific story of judicial outrage and how the family court system destroyed an entire family, destroyed many employees, and has destroyed the lives of a great man and pediatrician, Dr. Carlos Rivera. Welcome to the show today, Carlos.
Thank you for having me on, Gary.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell us about your marriage, when you got married, how long you were married, how many children you had. Tell us about your life before the divorce.
I actually had a nice life before that. I grew up in Deer Park, which is on Long Island here. Met my wife on a blind date, which was actually kind of interesting. And we had a nice relationship. Things were going well for a while. And after a few years of dating and engagement, we ended up getting married, I believe, in 1992, right before starting medical school. And for a while, things were well. You know, we had started having children there. We're happy to have 4 healthy children, and they're all doing well. Shortly after residency, I went into my own private practice with someone, and things continued to do well. But I started to have marital issues at that point, and I found myself in counseling. At one point, figured that we had it resolved and we're doing well. Unfortunately, the marriage dissolved, and I suddenly became one of the 50% of America that was divorced at that point. Never really expected to get married. Unfortunately, that's what came to be. And from that point, things started to get increasingly difficult.
Let's get into what happened and went down to the road. This is just what shocks everybody.
Well, actually, most of the damage took place before I even went to family court because I had a non-contested divorce. One of the many things that happened was that my life became a crucible of stress right prior to signing for my divorce. My ex-wife at the time was working in the practice as an accounts payable. She paid the bills in the practice, and her sister was the office manager. So once the divorce initiated, proceedings the separation began, it became very difficult. As you can imagine, I was working with my ex-wife and her sister as the office manager. My now fiance Jamie was working at the same office, so it had a soap opera start to begin with. Things became increasingly worse at that point, and tensions were rising to the point where things now, the finances of the practice went into turmoil, unfortunately due to management issues I was taking on at that point. And I found myself, unfortunately, having a major depressive episode, which, to get rid of the lingo, is a nervous breakdown, or for people that are wealthy, it's called exhaustion. It's the same thing. So that was a very difficult thing. I had been battling depression for quite some time. Once I had a major depressive episode, my ex at the time couldn't be troubled to even call me to see how I was doing in the hospital. But once I was discharged from the hospital, I literally walked out of the hospital, came home, was instructed to call my lawyer immediately. My partner at the time, who I have a partnership in the former practice where I was 50% owner, contacts me the same day to cut all ties and to go through attorneys. Next thing you know, my ex is telling me that she wants to have supervised visitation and restrict my access to the children. And my lawyer is calling me to say, we need to meet. She wants to get her divorce signed right away. This was actually the key downfall to everything. So that's literally how I considered like the Titanic hit the ice. And that's when it really started, and I had no idea at the time. So within 2 weeks of discharge from my hospital admission, I find myself at a conference table with my ex-wife, her attorney, and my attorney. And the question I get all the time now is, well, why on earth did you sign such?
Well, let's get back to what is
backwards.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
I'm sorry, Gary.
What is it that you signed? I mean, a lot of people say, well, did you go to trial? Did the judge appoint this? How is it that you're talking about an agreement that you signed, which we'll talk about in a second, but how does this agreement get presented to you, and how do you end up signing this agreement?
One more thing, if I backtrack, that happened was I had several friends who also had gone through divorce, and one of them was more of a poignant story where he, at one point, had a little bit of money, and then he went into a high conflict divorce with his ex, and said, when it was all said and done, the only one who made out with the lawyers, was it worth the fight? It wasn't worth anything, and it was a very sad conversation to have with him. So that was kind of my prelude into going into my conference meeting that time when my ex wanted to meet and have a divorce signed and finalized. So I essentially, the way you get into these things is when people have something over you, you give in.
When you say something over you, what is it? The children? What is it that's over you?
Absolutely. There was a big guilt factor. I had just walked out of the hospitalization for depression. I'm now worried if I'm going to have access to my own children because I'm being threatened with that.
You're being threatened with supervised visitation.
Supervised visitation, a limited visitation. That was a horrific experience because now that was one of the worst things that I was starting to learn in separation was missing the children. Being in a relationship for 22 years with somebody, you're used to things and you have a sequence of events, or just what's the word I'm looking for? A habit. You have a routine that's going.
And you also take for granted. You come home and your kids are there, and you see them be happy, be sad. Help them with their homework.
And that was the hardest part, actually, because for the relationship to break up was hard enough to be with somebody for 22 years, but then to miss your children, you have no idea what that's like until it happens. And mentally, you could think that you're preparing for it or that you're ready. You're never ready. You're just never ready. Missing the children was just a horrible, horrible experience. So I had already had some experience of what that was going to be like in the months leading up to the signing of the divorce. And the fear of it being even more limited than it already was just like, I can't. I can't. I have to be able to salvage this the best way I can. I want things to be the best for the children that they can be. I wanted to work through all the problems I had in the backfield with finances to start to open up a new office or a practice. I had to worry about limited visitation. What was I going to do with this partnership that dissolved? There was a lot going on all at the same time. So next thing I know, I basically acquiesced to all of my ex-wife's demands. But again, not only was I being pressured there, but I really never knew of what could happen. And that's a major problem I have right now. With my occupation, I'm responsible to explain things to people and to make sure they understand. What fascinates me is that you can get divorced and have little to no explanation of what could happen. So if I look back and someone said, well, listen, if you can't keep up with this agreement, you could be incarcerated for 6 months, or your wages can be garnished, you could lose absolutely everything in your life. Yeah, of course you wouldn't sign that. But it was never clarified to me. It was never mentioned. It was simply, okay, you're going to try to keep the kids in the house. Let's keep things rolling. Here's what she wants. Let's keep the house up. Sign here. And then after I signed the divorce, my attorney simply just says, here, sign this to cover my ass. That was the only explanation I had of that clause, to protect her from any responsibility from a horrible contract that she herself wrote up.
Honestly, I don't even we'll put it into perspective. People are listening to you now, and you're articulate, and you're moving on, and you're fighting this battle, and you're seeing patients. I think, to put it in perspective, you were less than 2 weeks out of a hospital for a major depressive episode, probably taking medications. Yes. I don't even know how you could think clearly.
It was difficult, and in my life I had always faced challenges and said, okay, we'll just move on. Let's push through. We're going to find a solution. We're going to make this work. The truth is, I was just facing too much. The major depressive episode from the stress was a lot right there. I think that alone with divorce was going to be enough. Right. But then now I was facing financial ruin. I had no job at the time. I was between practices. My other partner literally locked me out of the practice, changed the locks, changed all my access to financial records. Money that was literally mine was now being kept from me. And then at the time, that's when the real estate market dropped, so I couldn't get a loan. So prior to that, had I gone 6 months early and tried to left under controlled circumstances, I could have got a $250,000 loan, no questions asked, wouldn't have been a problem. When I went, it all happened when the real estate market crashed. So I essentially faced a trifecta of just horrible scenario.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts. What is it that you agreed to? I mean, the dollars we're going to get to in a second, because I don't even think anybody can even grasp how insane it is. But percentages, what percentage of your income, which really you had zero income at the time, but of your prior income, what percentage would you say you agreed to give your ex-wife, the net amount?
I literally signed away about 90 to 95% of my income. At the time, I never proclaimed to be a good businessman. I enjoy taking care of people. I'm really fortunate for my opportunity and my privilege of being a physician. That's my thing. The finances at home and the office were handled by my ex-wife at the time. So I just really thought I'm going to keep them in the house. When my youngest is going to kindergarten, she'll be able to work, and I'm going to make this work for a while, and then we would work together to have a good outcome for the kids and keep them in the house. What I signed for was child support that equaled about $6,000 a month just for the 4 children, which is about 30% more than what it calculated out to be. But I wanted the child support amount to cover the mortgage at that time, because I bought my house when the real estate was overinflated. In addition to that, I agreed to pay her utilities, her electric, her oil, her water, her car payment, her gasoline, her telephone, car insurance, upkeep on the house, landscaping. So in my head, I was like, okay, let me just make sure the kids are okay. I'm going to start working again. I was in the practice. It was seeing 120 children a day and had a net worth of $2.2 million a year, being essentially inefficiently run. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make this happen. And I signed for it thinking that we were going to work together. I had no clue that this was going to be a unilateral annihilation when I signed it, because it literally made me responsible for everything, and my ex-wife had no obligation whatsoever financially to the children or any other responsibilities at that point. So now, that's when it started, and things became vindictive. My LIPA bill was $800 per month. I had 2 $500 water bills. My ex-wife was using my corporate card right before I was ousted from the practice and spent $15,000 Christmas shopping in 2008. I was like, my partner came to me and was outraged, and I couldn't blame them. And I called her on the phone. I was like, what were you thinking? What did you do? She said, you said I could use the card. I was like, you used a corporate card for $15,000. What did you spend? And then she just starts crying, and that was the end of that. Never had an explanation of how you spend that much money. So I signed for this agreement, hoping to keep the kids in the house and hoping to keep her okay. And right from that moment on, it was just simply her life mission became to just destroy me.
So going back for the next 4 years after you sign the agreement, what happens? Are you paying any child support? Are you paying any spousal support? What are you paying in the next 4 years?
I was paying an outrageous amount, but I think that what's a key point to understand my financial downfall was that I had to start a practice with no startup funds. The first person who let me borrow money was actually a patient's mother. So there was quite a bit of stress, and I literally, for the first time in my life, could not sleep. If I did fall asleep, it was for like an hour or so at a time, and I'd wake up drenched just from stress. And then some good fortune came my way where I had a friend of mine who I take care of her children insist on trying to help me, and I really couldn't. I was like, this is somebody who has very simple means, and as a physician, I couldn't borrow money from somebody who lived in a basement apartment. I was like, how can you do that? But she had an inheritance left to her from her mother, and said, listen, I can lend you some money, we can get started. And she let me borrow $10,000, and at first I didn't want to do it. It was humiliating and it was humbling. Her daughter needs a heart-lung transplant, and may never even get it. It's so hard to get heart-lung transplants for a child that young. And I was humbled, and I was literally in tears. I can't accept this. I just can't accept this. But I came to a point where I had no option. So literally with $10,000 is how I started a pediatric practice. So I ended up finding a retired pediatrician who had his office connected to his home. So on a long shot, I knocked on his door, and he agreed to let me work out of that practice. So the office was under construction and renovations that I was doing along with help from my patients, and then patients slowly started to lend me money to the tune of $140,000. These aren't people who are wealthy. These are people who are like simple means. So now you look back and you say, okay, I signed this agreement that was worth my salary when I was at my peak salary in a very, very busy practice. I'm now ousted. I can't get a loan. I'm borrowing money from blue-collar people. It was a Cinderella start to it. But from the beginning, it was obvious I wasn't going to make it. And some of the other things that really hurt me as I was trying to pay child support and all the bills was that at that point I had to use credit cards for everything. And there's a clause in my divorce where I wasn't allowed to have my children near my fiance, at that time my girlfriend, for at least 1 year. So now every time I had to do dinner or visitation with my children, there was no place else to take them. So now on weekends away, I would have to go to a hotel room or take some kind of trip. And between that and starting up my practice on credit cards, that was the beginning. Now I started to fall between an avalanche of debt. So over the next couple of years, I am trying to keep up. I'm trying to have a practice float with no money, trying to keep up with an agreement that was pretty much making me responsible for $15,000 a month by the time you take $6,000 in child support, all the kids' extracurricular activities, her vehicle, her utilities. I couldn't keep up. I just couldn't keep up. So you're looking at about $15,000 a month. I was trying to keep up. And if you look at it, I ended up giving over $495,000 in 4 years when she takes me to court for child support arrears. So I thought that this is insane. When anybody can look at this and see that, wow, he paid an astronomical amount of money. Look at all these, look at all these bills and whatnot. And even her family was like, they're on board with her to support her, and I can understand that initially. It was like, how do you stay in a 4,000 square foot home with $5,000 a year taxes, pay all the utilities, and you're not working? How do you do that for months, years on end? So I thought this is very plain to see that this agreement was just untenable, and I was in way over my head. Unfortunately, that didn't really factor in when I found myself in family court.
So now you find yourself, you're in family court 4 years later after you've already paid over $100,000 a year, which is, remember, net after taxes for your ex-wife. Listen, I think everybody would love to have that deal.
It's funny that you said that because my attorney at the conference where I signed the divorce said that everybody in the office wanted to be my ex-wife.
I want to be your ex-wife.
Yeah, essentially, it was $184,000 to be my ex-wife.
Right.
That was the payout.
Right.
So, again, like over $490,000 in 4 years,
right,
to pay for everything, and yet she's not working. She's spending money as if I'm still at my peak salary.
And then she has the nerve to take you to court and ask the judge, and this is an important thing because a lot of people say, well, the ex-wife didn't do it, the judge did it. Your ex-wife asked to have you put in jail because you were supposed to pay $660,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you go to court, and I guess you're figuring, what, the judge is going to look at this and laugh?
My biggest problem was that I was naive walking into this. I had the notion that truth will prevail. The system is designed to help people. It's designed about justice and honesty, the whole balance scale. It's not. I found that out the hard way. And when I was in court, I presented all my paperwork, my financials, my tax returns, or I thought my tax returns were entered, but they weren't. They were given to discovery, but not into evidence for the court. But I had all this paperwork showing here's my hardship. Here's the money that I put forth, that I spent, and the magistrate even commented on how much the volume of paperwork I gave her. It was 4 copy paper boxes of financials and reports of what I had spent, and I thought that upon review, it's going to be obvious that I've paid everything I can. This agreement just really couldn't be sustained. And that is not what happened. And when my ex was given the choice of, well, do you want him incarcerated? Her quote unquote, if that's what it takes, was her statement. I was like, it's that simple to have someone thrown in jail?
Well, I think there's a couple issues that bother me as a family law reform and somebody went through the divorce. Is, listen, it's up to your wife's lawyer to try to get you put in jail. That's your wife's lawyer. That's her job. She wants to get you put in jail. We understand that. She's mad. I don't agree with it. But the judge has to look at this and say, number one, you were just out of a hospital for depression. You weren't thinking clearly when you voluntarily signed this agreement. Number two, your ex-wife knew exactly how much you were making. You were married for 15 years. She knew you were incapable of fulfilling this contract that you had. Number three, everybody knew what you were making. It was impossible for you to pay this. So it wasn't a willful. It wasn't something willful that the guy's living high on the hog. You had no money left. I mean, it was clear that you had no money. You were in debt up to your eyeballs. You had borrowed everything you possibly could. So what shocks me is that the judge doesn't look at it and say, you know what, Miss Rivera, this isn't going to happen. The man's doing everything he can. He's trying to work. I mean, look, you had no money. I mean, at times I think you were sleeping on people's couches. Absolutely. You were borrowing people's cars because your car was sold. You took a lien on the one vehicle that you had, which was a motorcycle. You took a lien on it. So it wasn't like you had money. And just as importantly is you were trying to build a practice so that you could live up to this. And now you get to the thing, you have your day in court, and what happens?
I'd like to back up because the 3 points that you brought up are each loaded points. One, the depression and the medication. When that came up in court, I was actually ridiculed for that by my ex-wife's attorney, where she said, "Oh well, when the going gets tough, he plays the depression card."
Which is funny, isn't that covered under the Americans for Disabilities Act?
It is, and I thought that if I was in a wheelchair and you made some kind of reference along those lines to being handicapped, a physical handicap, it would be outrageous. Right. You can have, a mental health issue and depression and be mocked in court. And I stood there silently, and I really couldn't believe what they're allowed to get away with. And in my opinion, it was slander, as well as being a civil rights issue, a civil liberties issue. That was the first part. The next part is my ex-wife handled the finances at home, and she was paying the bills at the practice. She knew what was possible. And I do recall vividly, as I was packing to move out, the discussion followed was more like a tense discussion. And she warned me, "You're never going to be able to afford to live on your own." Those were her own words. She knew what she was doing. I was too naive to put it into perspective. It's only in retrospect that I could see, my God, that she played me perfectly.
So this is all in front of the judge, and I think the viewers are going to be shocked when they hear what happened next. What's the judge's decision on this case?
Well, it's actually the magistrate wrote her report.
Who is the magistrate?
Barbara Lenoir was the magistrate.
So this is not even a judge?
No, this is a magistrate.
Okay, Barbara Lenoir.
Barbara Lenoir. And, of course, they don't give you the decision there.
Okay.
They said, we're going to review it, and you'll know within 1 month you'll have the decision.
So a judge never heard all this testimony?
Never heard a word of it. Never heard a word of the trial. It was all in front of Barbara Lenoir. She commented on the volume of paperwork I had given. I was being represented by a firm that was literally a local legend. So I thought I'm telling the truth. I'm being handled by a well-known attorney. Let's see how things go. And as a month progressed to 6 weeks, I was like, oh, this must be good. They must be reviewing all the paperwork. Next thing I come home, my fiance is showing me a letter showing me that I was given the maximum judgment against me. Every request, every complaint that my ex-wife put forth was granted, and I was facing a maximum incarceration of 6 months. And I looked at it in disbelief. Wow. I was like, this can't be for real.
Well, that's just something that disgusts me, and that's one of the reasons I'm involved. Because first of all, nowhere else in the justice system do you put somebody in jail without a jury.
Absolutely.
You don't even have a judge.
Absolutely.
You had a woman who, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the most biased, nasty, incompetent people that we have. I say sitting on the bench, but she's not sitting on the bench because she's not even a judge. She's a hearing support magistrate. So this woman hears your case, and the decision is that you're getting the maximum sentence. One person could put you in jail for 6 months. Tell me you didn't go to jail for 6 months.
I went to jail for 6 months. It was a surreal experience because I had never been in trouble with the law before. I had maybe 2 speeding tickets. In my life, I was essentially a nerd my entire life. I was always in nerdy classes. I was an Eagle Scout, band, like everything you could think of as far as, my kid's a good kid. Never in trouble. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in court. I'm being instructed by a court officer to keep my hands on the rail as if I'm some type of violent felon or threat to society. He's standing right behind me, and I was given a choice of either I can pay an $80,000 purge or go to jail. I was like, I didn't have $80,000, and there was no one left to borrow from. Next thing I know, I'm in handcuffs.
And I got to tell you, what's really disgusting to me, and anybody watching this should see, because this Barbara Lenore is a disgusting woman. This woman thinks putting a loving father in jail for 6 months is in the best interest of the children. Get her the hell out of that courtroom. Because that's a bunch of crap. Not only that your children didn't have it, your whole practice that you started to build up again. I think 12 people lost their jobs.
Fast forward, you're going to see that, in order for the court to get $9% interest on what would have totaled $250,000 by the end of my incarceration, it cost the taxpayers $160,000 for the same 6-month period by the time you pay for me to be in jail for $225 a day. My kids are on social services. They're now getting state health insurance as opposed to private insurance. My employees are now on unemployment. Some of their kids need Child Health Plus. And that's what a lot of people don't realize.
Well, we're running out of time, so we have to wrap this up. I know it's a big story, but we only have a half hour to tell it.
Sorry.
But let's fast forward. Right now, we're looking at, believe it or not, they're looking to put you in jail for 6 months again. And this has got to stop. We have to stop it. We're doing protests. Everybody who's watching this, please go to Facebook, Google Dr. Carlos Rivera, see what you can do. We're doing protests. Who are you in front of now? What judge?
I'm in front of Judge Luft again, who is the judge that sentenced me to 6 months in jail.
Okay, so hopefully this time this is never end. I mean, I guess this judge thinks she'll do 6 months in, 6 months out, 6 months in, 6 months. It's never going to end. The judge has got to use some common sense. It's got to stop this. And just in closing statements, because I know there's issues with some of the children now that your ex-wife is alienating or turning one of your children, or trying all of them, but has been successful with one of them, which I know has been heartbreaking for you because you talk about it all the time, how you live for your children. If your kids are watching this, and especially your oldest, what is it that what message do you want to get out?
The biggest thing, I could deal with the humiliation that I've been through. My divorce has been very public. Who's ever heard of a pediatrician going to jail for child support? Financial ruin, I can handle that. I can move on from that. Being alienated from my children has been the single worst thing I've ever endured in my life. I've lost both of my parents while I was in medical school. I've had, upsets and, misfortunes in my life. Nothing, even combined, compares to parental alienation. And I truly feel that this is a form of child abuse that should be outlawed. It should be punished.
Something you said to me that really touched me is when you were talking about your children being turned against you and not being able to see them, you said, I would go back into jail for 6 months, for a year. I would much rather do that than have to endure losing my children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As horrible as jail was, it was nothing in comparison. I think people don't realize what it's like to not have access to your children, to be so desperate that you can't even look at pictures of them because it hurts too much, or every little thing they give you, every scrap of paper, every little note you save and you hang on to that. It has a value that can't be sold. And it's painful. It's extremely painful. It leads to depression problems in these children. They have all types of emotional issues to carry into adulthood. And then the other thing that people don't talk about is how despondent some people become. And the rate of suicide in men that are subject to parental alienation and divorce is astronomical. And when you look at the figures, I actually calculated it out. Each year, enough men commit suicide as a result of despondency from parental alienation and divorce that you could fill Jones Beach Theater, which is a local theater here. So imagine the next time you go that it's filled with people so despondent from being alienated from their children. It is a horrible existence right now.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rivera, and I feel sorry, and we feel your pain. And Barbara Lenore, Judge Luft, if you're watching this, you got to do the right thing, because you know what? We're not going to let this go away. We're going to expose it. We're going to let people see, and people are going to be outraged for what you're doing to this man. Keep up the fight.
Thank you.
And we're all there with you, standing behind you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
I'm Gary Jacobs for Long Island Backstory. We'll see you next week.